Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to dive into a massive story, 500 years of Brazil's environmental journey. It's a story of a nation constantly trying to walk this tightrope between preservation and profit. And it all revolves around one profound question about our place in the natural world.
So really, everything we're about to talk about, it all boils down to this one single question. Are we a part of nature, or are we apart from it? Do we see ourselves as its guardians, or as its masters? This fundamental idea is the invisible current that has shaped Brazil's history for half a millennium.
And this really illustrates it perfectly. You've got these two ways of seeing the world, right? On one side, you have a disintegrated view where people are kind of separate from nature, treating it like a big box of resources to be used. On the other side, you've got an integrated view where we're seen as just one piece of the puzzle. This clash is what has defined Brazil's laws and its very landscape for centuries.
Okay, so to make sense of this, we're going to break it down into three big chunks of time. First, the colonial phase, which was all about extraction. Then, the imperial phase, where you can feel the conflict starting to brew. And finally, the Republican phase, where modern environmental law as we know it starts to take shape. Let's start at the very beginning.
Our story kicks off in the colonial era. And you got to remember, for the Portuguese crown, the relationship with this vast, rich new world was, well, it was pretty one-dimensional. It was all about resources, exploitation, and most importantly, control.
And the story of Brazil's environment literally starts with the tree that gave the country its name, Brazilwood. As this quote points out, it was the very first resource to be harvested on a massive scale. So intensely, in fact, that it was nearly wiped out.
So you might think the first laws were about, protecting the forest. But nope. When the first royal decree, the Carta Regia, came out, it was really about creating a monopoly. The goal wasn't to save the trees, it was to control this super valuable timber, to lock down economic and territorial power for Portugal.
But here's where it gets really interesting. Even in this time of just pure extraction, you start to see these little hints, these glimmers of a totally different way of thinking. As early as 1594, a king ordered some forests to be guarded. Fast forward a bit, and you have key figures talking about reforestation. And by 1821, you get the first actual law that required setting aside land as forest reserves. They were just tiny seeds, but the idea was there. Maybe nature wasn't bottomless after all.
And this new way of thinking, it gets a huge physical symbol in 1808, when the Portuguese royal family literally packed up and fled from Napoleon to Brazil. They set up the now world-famous Rio de Janeiro Botanical Garden. It was a landmark, a symbol that said, hey, nature has scientific value and beauty, not just value as a pile of raw materials.
All right, let's jump forward in time to the imperial era, which ran from 1822 to 1889. This is where that tension we talked about between using nature and protecting it really starts to boil over.
So this period is just full of contradictions. It's kind of wild. On one hand, you have the government passing new laws that actually punish deforestation and forest fires. But on the other hand, what's actually happening on the ground? A massive explosion of large-scale farming, especially coffee, which meant clear-cutting huge areas of forest. The law was saying one thing, but the economy was pushing hard in the exact opposite direction.
So that's the key takeaway here, right? The laws are on the books, but they're just not matching up with reality. The economic engine of deforestation was just way too powerful for the laws designed to stop it.
Okay, so this brings us into the modern era, the Republican phase. Now, after a century of this conflict between what the law says and what's actually happening, the 20th century is where we see a slow but steady move toward building a real, modern, legal framework for the environment. But man, it was a slow start. I mean, think about it. As late as 1934, the new Constitution and the really important Water Code, they were still talking about nature in that same old way, as sources of wealth to be explored. That old mindset, it was still very much in charge.
But then, you get to the mid-1960s, and you can feel a real shift. For the first time, the law itself starts to use completely new language. The 1964 Land Statute explicitly talks about finding harmony between humanity and the environment. Then, just a year later, a way stronger forest code comes out. The words really matter here. The official philosophy was finally starting to change.
And all of this, it's all building up to one landmark moment, a single law that was a total game changer for environmental policy in Brazil.
The year? 1981. This is the turning point in our entire 500-year story.
This is the year Brazil creates the National Environmental Policy, or PNMA. And listen, this wasn't just another law. It was a whole new system. It set up a modern, comprehensive, and interconnected framework to manage the environment on a national scale. It was absolutely revolutionary.
What it did was introduce these incredibly powerful tools that, frankly, we kind of take for granted today. For the first time, you had to actually assess a project's environmental impact before you even started building. You needed a license for any activity that could pollute. The government could now set quality standards for air and water, and it could zone land to protect important ecosystems. It was a huge shift from just reacting to damage to actually trying to manage development from the get-go.
So all of this legal evolution, it brings us right up to our modern idea of sustainability. It's not just that simple tug of war anymore between profit and preservation. True sustainability is what happens in the sweet spot where three things overlap. You need something that's ecologically sound, socially fair, and economically possible. That little bit in the middle, that's the new goal.
So here we are, after this incredible 500-year journey, from just raw exploitation to this really complex, modern system of laws. The basic conflict is still there. Brazil has some of the most advanced environmental laws anywhere, but it's also facing huge challenges. Which brings us right back to where we started, and our final thought for today. 500 years on, have we really found that balance?